Ever feel like you're trying to decode reality? Like there's more going on than meets the eye.
Yeah, definitely.
That's the kind of puzzle we love to unpack here. So today, we're plunging into a really wild idea, human dealing with human simulation.
HDHS.
Yes. Stick with us because, well, this might just change how you see everything.
It's fascinating, isn't it? How this idea, HDHS, it sort of starts in the very cutting edge of technology, AI trying to mimic human users.
Right.
And then suddenly it blossoms into this incredible framework for understanding, well, what it means to be human.
Exactly. So in the AI world, they build these smart programs that act like us. It could be to figure out how people will use a new app, maybe, or to train a chat bot so it sounds less robotic.
And these large language models, the LLMs, they've really cranked up the realism, haven't they, in these AI humans?
They really have.
Which brings us to a really interesting point, and one that's, I think, relevant to all of us. Just because something seems real doesn't mean it is a perfect reflection of reality. An AI can sound human, sure, but is it truly acting like one?
Good question.
This gap, between believability and accuracy, it's crucial because it really mirrors how we humans build and live within our own social worlds.
How so?
Well, they feel real, our social structures, our norms, they function. But are they always the full story? Probably not.
Okay, let's dig a little deeper then, because the initial idea we looked at, it wasn't just about computers, was it?
No, not at all.
It was about these core human desires to feel good, to live longer, to have well-being, the whole package. And it suggested that even our emotions, like laughter or sadness, are searched for meaning. It's all connected to this HDHS.
Yeah, if we zoom out, HDHS looks like a fundamental human strategy. We're constantly creating and navigating layers of meaning.
Like what kind of layers?
Think about the story you tell yourself about who you are.
Okay, personal narrative.
Right. Or the unwritten rules of how to act in public, the beliefs that guide your choices. These aren't just random, they're constructed realities that we actively participate in.
So we're talking about my own life story, the narrative I've built all the way up to these huge shared societal things, like the value we place on money.
Exactly, or even the way our institutions work.
Right.
And in that sense, yeah, AI user simulation is just a super advanced, technologically sophisticated version of something humans have been doing, well, basically forever.
Building models and telling tales.
Precisely, building models, telling stories.
This makes you wonder about intelligence itself, doesn't it?
It really does.
Could the essence of being intelligent, whether you're a person or, some future AI, be this basic ability to model complex systems
And interact with them
through some form of simulation? Yeah.
It's like we've got this internal simulator running, maybe subconsciously all the time, trying to figure things out, navigate the world.
And even shape it.
And even shape it to fit what we want or need. That drive to understand, to handle complexity, to achieve our goals. That seems to be what powers this whole HDHS thing.
It's fundamental.
And to really get a handle on this, we looked at insights from a whole bunch of fields.
Yeah, the sources were pretty diverse.
Right. From AI itself, philosophy, psychology, sociology, even physics and math have something to say about it.
And what's striking is that each of these fields offers a different angle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A unique way of seeing HDHS.
Totally. Different lenses on the same phenomenon.
Which brings us to this key point. This isn't some brand new idea just cooked up in Silicon Valley, right?
Absolutely not.
This goes way, way back in human history. It's not just about our latest gadgets.
No, definitely not. If we look at what's called cognitive archaeology,
Okay.
we see the beginnings of symbolic thought way back tens of thousands of years ago. Think about those incredible cave paintings.
Lascaux, Altamira.
Exactly. Those aren't just pretty pictures. They represent a massive cognitive leap.
Also,
Well, early humans could take their three-dimensional world and essentially simulate it on a flat cave wall. They were creating abstract representations, communicating complex ideas visually.
that is early HDHS in action, isn't it?
It really is.
It's still amazing to look at them. The detail in those animal drawings.
Incredible skill.
And some theories suggest this wasn't just art for art's sake, right? It might have been part of rituals.
That's a prominent idea, maybe a kind of hunting magic, trying to influence the success of their hunts through these painted simulations.
Or maybe spiritual.
Or perhaps connected to spiritual beliefs, trying to connect with something beyond the physical world, simulating the supernatural. And if we consider evolutionary cognitive archaeology, or ECA,
Okay.
it suggests we can learn a lot about how those early humans thought by looking at what they created. Even these early symbolic acts, the art, simple rituals, they were ways of externalizing their internal models of the world.
Their hopes, their fears.
Exactly. Their fears, hopes, social bonds, their understanding of nature, grappling with it all through these early simulations. It shows the minimum necessary competence they needed to deal with their reality.
And then you've got storytelling and myth-making evolving alongside that.
Absolutely. Before writing, these oral traditions were, well, everything. How we kept history alive, explained phenomena.
Passed on culture, taught morals.
Right. These myths, they were foundational simulations, weren't they? Shaping how entire societies viewed the world and answered those big existential questions.
Foundational simulations, I like that.
And the move to written narratives, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, that was another monumental step for HDHS.
Why monumental?
Because writing allowed these shared simulations to become more stable, to spread more widely, and to last much longer. They weren't just entertainment.
They were cognitive tools.
Exactly. Cognitive tools for building social cohesion, strengthening cultural identity, providing a framework for meaning.
It feels like our ability to think in symbols and our ability to use language just fed off each other.
A positive feedback loop, yeah. More sophisticated representation allowed for more elaborate shared realities.
Which in turn drove further cognitive development.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is the idea that HDHS wasn't just a byproduct of evolution. It might have been actively involved in shaping it.
How so?
Well, the ability to create and engage with these symbolic worlds probably gave early humans a real advantage. Survival advantage, social advantage.
And consciousness itself, that inner awareness we have, that seems crucial for this complex level of simulation, right?
Absolutely. It's not just reacting, it's having that internal space to model, to reflect, to think about the world and your place in it.
You need that for a complex HDHS.
And alongside that, we see the early development of social lives and norms, even in early Homo species. These basic ways of behaving, interacting. There were early forms of shared behavioral simulation.
Like basic rules of the road for social life.
Kind of, yeah. And you needed a basic understanding that others had their own thoughts and beliefs, what psychologists call theory of mind, to make those social simulations work.
Got it.
And as our brains got bigger and our childhoods lasted longer, needing more care and learning,
Right, longer dependency.
those social networks became more stable, which laid the groundwork for even more sophisticated HDHS later on.
Okay, so bigger brains, longer childhoods, better social networks, all feeding into more complex simulations.
And we can't forget the origins of religion. These were some of the most elaborate early forms of HDHS.
Why elaborate?
Because they were attempts to understand and manage the big, inexplicable aspects of existence. Think about anthropological ideas, animism, fear of ghosts, awe of nature.
Right, Tyler, Spencer, Mueller.
Yeah, those early theories suggest humans were trying to simulate and interact with forces they couldn't see, trying to make sense of it all.
And you see hints of that in archaeology too, don't you? Burial practices, the symbolic art.
Definitely. They suggest early spiritual thought, complex attempts to simulate unseen forces, maybe what happens after death, offering explanations, order, perhaps even a sense of influence over events.
It's like they were building models of the unseen world.
And here's a thought. The very act of creating these early simulations, the hunting magic, the creation myths, might have actually been a catalyst for higher order consciousness itself.
Wow.
Because it required and therefore helped refine those cognitive tools. Representation, foresight, planning, shared intentionality, working together on a simulation, building it together.
So it really seems like this ability, this HDHS, wasn't just something that happened to us. It was actively involved in making us the uniquely thinking cultural creatures we are today.
Absolutely. It's deeply woven into our evolutionary story.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit, moving from that huge historical sweep.
To the individual level.
Yeah, to the individual.
Yeah.
How is HDHS embedded in our psychological makeup? How does it shape our daily lives?
Well, it's everywhere, really. It shapes how we see ourselves, experience emotions, process information, make decisions.
And a big part of that is our narrative identity, right? The story we tell ourselves about our own life.
Exactly. It's not just a list of things that happen. It's this ongoing, internalized story that gives us a sense of unity, coherence, purpose.
Who we are, where we've come from, where we're going.
And what's interesting is how these self-stories often revolve around common themes like redemption, overcoming challenges.
Or contamination, things going wrong.
Right, or our sense of agency, control over our lives, and communion, our connection with others.
And research actually links having a well-developed, meaningful self-story to psychological well-being, doesn't it?
It does. So these personal identities we create are like constantly updated simulations of who we are. Meaning making is a fundamental purpose there.
And emotions, they play a massive role in this subjective experience too. It's not just simple reactions, feeling happy or sad.
No, it's more complex. There's a really influential theory, the theory of constructed emotion by Lisa Feldman Barrett, which suggests our brains are actively constructing these emotional experiences.
Constructing them? How?
Based on sensory input, signals from our body interoception, the concepts we've learned about emotions, and the social context we're in. So what we feel as anger or joy is actually a construction.
A kind of simulation of an emotional state.
Exactly. So our experience of HDHS is shaped by how we interpret these internal feelings within the cultural and situational simulations we're part of. Emotions themselves become part of the simulative process.
Wow. Okay. And self-awareness must be key to all of this, right?
Absolutely. You need to be aware of yourself, your body, your identity, your interactions to even engage with simulations.
And there's different kinds of self-awareness.
Yeah, there's the basic subjective experience, just feeling things. But then there's objective self-awareness, where you can kind of step back and think about yourself. That emerges around 18 months.
And that's important for
self-regulation. We compare ourselves to internal standards, ideal selves, often derived from social norms, those shared simulations.
Okay, so self-awareness lets us navigate the simulations by comparing ourselves to them.
And then we have our cognitive biases, those mental shortcuts. We all use them.
Confirmation bias is a big one, right? Looking for stuff that confirms what we already think.
Huge one. Or the availability heuristic, judging things based on how easily examples come to mind. These biases, along with logical fallacies, errors in reasoning, they really shape our personal simulations of reality.
They can make our simulations drift away from objective facts.
Definitely. And what's fascinating is how strongly we often hold on to these simulations, even with contradictory evidence. Confirmation bias helps maintain that feeling of coherence, even if it's inaccurate.
It really highlights how subjective our experience is, how much it's shaped by our own cognitive architecture.
And intuition, that gut feeling, that plays a role too, doesn't it?
How did that fit in?
Well, intuition often relies on these fast heuristic processes. It's like our brain quickly accessing and running simulations based on past experiences, learned patterns.
Intuition heuristic.
Right. It's efficient, but also susceptible to the same biases we just talked about. It's another tool for navigating constructed realities quickly.
And then there's self-deception. Sometimes we kind of bend reality for ourselves.
Yeah, denying or rationalizing away uncomfortable truths. Evolutionary psychology suggests this might even be adaptive sometimes.
Adaptive, how?
Maybe to facilitate interpersonal deception. It's easier to lie convincingly if you partly believe it yourself, or just to maintain a positive self-image and keep our narrative identity coherent.
So we kind of edit our internal simulations.
Essentially, yes. We might unconsciously bias how we process information to maintain that coherent story or our social standing within a constructed reality.
So putting it all together, these psychological mechanisms, narrative identity, constructed emotion, self-awareness, biases, intuition, self-deception, they form this integrated system.
And it seems geared towards prioritizing coherence, meaning, and psychological self-preservation, often over objective accuracy.
Driven by this story-craving brain.
Exactly. Our brains seem wired to create narratives, build complex simulations, even from minimal data. The default mode seems to be actively simulatory.
Okay, so that's the individual level. Now, how do these personal simulations connect and scale up to the cultural and societal level?
That's where things get really interesting, because individual psychology interacts with these larger forces to create vast collective simulations.
And the idea of the social construction of reality is key here, right? Berger and Luckman.
Foundational, yes. The idea that perceived reality isn't just passively received, it's actively produced and maintained through shared experiences and interactions.
Could you break down that process?
They described it as having 3 moments. First, externalization. We create the social world through our actions, language, ideas.
Okay, we make stuff.
Then, objectivation. These products seem to take on a life of their own, appearing as objective facts. Think about institutions like schools, marriage, government. They feel solid, real.
Right, they're just the way things are.
And finally, internalization. Individuals learn and internalize these objectified realities. They become part of our own consciousness, shaping how we perceive everything.
So society itself is like this grand, co-constructed simulation.
In a very real sense, yes.
Okay.
And that leads to the Thomas theorem.
If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences.
Exactly. Think about money. It's just paper or numbers. But our shared definition makes it incredibly powerful. Or race, a social construct with devastating real-world consequences.
And these societal simulations get passed down through generations, right? Cultural reproduction.
Yes, Bourdieu talked a lot about this. He focused on how systems, especially the education system, transmit the dominant cultural forms, the dominant simulations, and help maintain social hierarchies.
Through things like cultural capital.
Precisely. The knowledge, skills, tastes valued by the dominant culture, having it give you advantages. And there's the hidden curriculum, too, socializing people into the existing order.
So cultural reproduction ensures the continuity of these societal simulations, and proficiency in the dominant simulation becomes a form of power.
Which raises the question, who benefits from particular forms of HDHS?
Yeah. And Harari's perspective on imagined orders or shared fictions fits here too, doesn't it?
Perfectly. Gods, nations, money, laws, human rights. He argues these are the basis for the large-scale flexible cooperation that's unique to Homo sapiens.
They exist only in our shared imagination.
But they enable strangers to cooperate effectively. However, as Harari points out, they're often not neutral or fair. They frequently establish hierarchies.
Their effectiveness is about cooperation and stability, not necessarily truth or equity.
Right. Function over fairness, often.
And in today's world, mass media plays a huge role in constructing and reinforcing these shared simulations, right?
Immense role. Chomsky and Herman's propaganda model looked at structural factors: ownership, advertising, sourcing, flack, ideology.
Leading to manufactured consent.
Yes, creating consent for the views of dominant elites. Media also frames issues, setting the agenda, and cultivation theory suggests it shapes our overall worldviews over time.
Significantly influencing public opinion, supporting existing power structures. It really addresses how the world reacts and who benefits from certain narratives.
And then you have collective behavior fads, crazes, panics, riots.
How does that fit HTHS?
The emergent norm perspective suggests that in ambiguous situations, new norms and beliefs can rapidly emerge within a group.
Creating temporary shared simulations.
Exactly. Guiding behavior that might seem irrational from the outside, like panic buying during a crisis.
And even deviance, what we consider normal versus not normal. That's socially constructed too.
Absolutely. Deviance isn't inherent in an act. It's a label society assigns based on its norms, values, and power structures. It varies across cultures and time.
And defining the other reinforces the shared simulation of acceptable behavior.
With profound consequences for marginalized individuals. It shows the power of HDHS to include and exclude.
So these societal level simulations, they're dynamic, constantly negotiated arenas of power struggle.
They provide stability and cooperation, yes, but they also embed inequalities. Human cooperation relies heavily on belief in these fictions that may lack objective basis and can be unfair.
Functional coherence of the group often seems to trump objective truth or individual equity.
Which raises serious ethical considerations about challenging these entrenched simulations.
Okay, so we've seen psychological and societal dimensions. What about the biological weave, genetics, evolution? How deep does this go?
It seems to go right down to our biology. HDHS isn't just cognitive or cultural, it's got genetic and evolutionary roots, too.
You mentioned gene-culture coevolution earlier. Can you expand on that?
Sure. It's the idea that our genes and our culture have dynamically interacted over evolutionary time. Culture created this novel environment that our genes then adapted to.
How so?
Well, human fitness became increasingly dependent on functioning within complex social structures based on shared norms and cooperation. This likely favored the evolution of pro-social traits, empathy, fairness, cooperation, and the capacity to internalize cultural norms.
So our genes equip us with the inclination to learn and operate according to the cultural software.
That's a good way to put it. Our biology is primed for HDHS because these shared simulations, moral codes, conventions, ways of cooperating were crucial for survival and reproduction.
And neuroscience supports the idea of a brain predisposed to narrative.
Strongly. Engaging with stories activates various brain regions, sensory cortices, motor cortex, creating immersive experiences. The hippocampus plays a key role in pattern making, organizing information into narratives, helping us make meaning.
Stories activate social cognition networks too.
Yes, networks networks associated with theory of mind, understanding others' perspectives, fostering empathy and social bonds. We really seem to have a story-craving mind, almost as a biological imperative driving much of HDHS.
Is there evidence for genetic influences on beliefs themselves?
There's research suggesting that general worldviews, fundamental beliefs about how the world works, show moderate heritability.
And what about religiosity genes?
That's a hypothesis that there might be genetic influences on an individual's predisposition towards religious belief. The mechanisms are complex, involving gene-environment interaction, of course.
So culture shapes the content, but the underlying tendency to believe might have a partial genetic basis.
That seems plausible. This neurobiological predisposition for narrative and potential genetic influences on belief likely co-evolved with cultural transmission.
Creating a really effective system.
Yeah, an effective system for generating, internalizing, sharing, and perpetuating complex simulations. Brains that readily process narrative information would be advantageous for learning cultural norms.
And a genetic predisposition to believe would make individuals more receptive to those narratives, improving social integration.
Making us beings adept at living within these narratively structured, belief-driven, simulated worlds. Biology actively shaped us for HDHS.
And it goes even further. The simulations themselves become part of the selection pressure.
That's the argument. If pro-sociality and norm internalization are products of gene culture coevolution, then the simulations themselves, the rules, the stories become part of the selective environment.
Favoring individuals better at navigating them.
Exactly. Favoring individuals genetically predisposed to understand, navigate, and benefit from these shared constructs. This leads to social success, enhanced reproduction, and over generations. Favors genes supporting HDHS-compatible traits like empathy, theory of mind, cooperation.
Making HDHS a deeply entrenched aspect of human nature, shaped by this intertwined genetic and cultural evolution. Wow.
It's a powerful integration.
Okay, let's switch gears again. We've covered history, psychology, society, biology.
Well,
What about philosophy? HDHS seems ripe for philosophical inquiry.
Absolutely. It touches on the most fundamental questions about reality and representation, appearance versus reality.
Where do we start? Plato.
Plato's theory of forms is a classic starting point. The idea that the physical world is just an imperfect imitation, a shadow of a higher realm of perfect forms or essences.
So Plato's right. Our everyday world is already a kind of simulation.
In a way, yes, an imperfect representation of a truer reality. The allegory of the cave illustrates this perfectly. It gives historical roots to questioning our senses and suggests we might always be dealing with simulation.
And more modern philosophy, constructivist epistemology.
Right. The idea that knowledge isn't passively received but actively constructed by us. An external world might exist, but our understanding of it is a human creation shaped by cognition, culture, language, social interaction.
Even scientific knowledge
Is seen as consisting of mental constructs, models useful, predictive perhaps, but not absolute truth. This strongly supports the idea that our simulations of reality are actively built. There isn't one single objective truth, but maybe multiple functional realities serving human purposes.
which leads us inevitably to Bostrom's simulation hypothesis.
The ultimate HDHS thought experiment, perhaps. The trilemma suggesting it's probabilistically likely we're living in a simulation if advanced civilizations can and do run many ancestor simulations.
It's not a proof, but
But a powerful argument based on certain assumptions about future technology, consciousness in simulations, computational limits. There are criticisms, of course.
it forces a radical reevaluation of what we consider real
Definitely. And then phenomenology shifts the focus entirely.
to subjective experience.
Lived space, being in the world, intentionality, its relevance to HDHS, especially the physicality aspect, is crucial. Even socially constructed or simulated realities are experienced as real and physical by the conscious subject.
Our bodies, our senses are central.
Exactly. Think about delusions, rigidly held false beliefs that feel utterly real to the person experiencing them. They show how subjective reality construction carries its own phenomenological weight, its own perceived physicality.
And the philosophy of information, how did that fit?
It examines the nature and role of information itself in constructing reality and perception. Information reduces uncertainty.
And our simulations, beliefs, narratives, models are structures of information.
Precisely. They help organize experience, reduce uncertainty. Remember the classical link between form and informatio. It raises debates about the truthfulness of information versus its functional effectiveness in HDHS.
A simulation might work well without being factually true.
That's often the case. So philosophical inquiries converge on this idea. Human experience of reality is always mediated, constructed. HDHS isn't an aberration, it's fundamental to knowing and being.
And information bridges the objective and subjective.
Information seems to be the currency. HDHS is like a continuous effort to extract patterns from informational flux, organize them, imbue them with significance, reduce uncertainty, and create functional models of reality. The purpose is tied to this informational imperative.
Transforming raw experience into a comprehensible world. Okay, what about the hard sciences? Physics, mathematics, logic.
They offer formal tools for analyzing both reality and our constructed simulations.
The observer effect in quantum mechanics often comes up.
It does. The idea that observing a quantum system, like in the double-slit experiment, can alter the outcome. It's crucial to clarify, though.
It's not necessarily about conscious observers.
Not in mainstream physics. It arises from the physical interaction required for measurement. Some interpretations link it to consciousness, but that's speculative. Still, it serves as a powerful metaphor for HDHS.
How so?
Just as measurement perturbs the quantum system, our interpretation and engagement influences social reality. It highlights the interactivity, the lack of detached objectivity.
Got it. Metaphor, not proof. What about math and logic?
They provide frameworks to analyze the structure and dynamics of simulations. Information theory, Shannon's entropy, measures uncertainty within belief systems.
Formal logic of belief.
Epistemic logic helps reason about knowledge and belief, distinguishing between knowing something and merely believing it, or degrees of belief. It defines rationality in terms of consistency or coherence.
And cognitive models.
Use mathematical structures to formalize cognitive processes, perception, memory, decision-making. Subjective expected utility theory models decisions based on perceived value and likelihood of outcomes.
Game theory, too, for interactions.
Absolutely. Models strategic interactions between players with strategies and payoffs. Concepts like Nash equilibrium show how stable behavioral patterns, shared interaction simulations can emerge based on beliefs about others.
In complexity theory.
Views social systems as complex adaptive systems where macro-level patterns emerge from local interactions and feedback loops, like Schelling's segregation model. Simple rules, complex outcomes.
So, applying these formal frameworks, what does it reveal about rationality in HDHS?
It often shows that rationality within human-constructed simulations is defined more by internal coherence, functional utility, or stability in social interaction, rather than strict correspondence to external truth.
Pragmatic success within the simulation.
Right. HDHS often operates on internal consistency in what works, and that observer effect metaphor keeps coming back. We are always participants, influencing the very simulations we're trying to understand.
Okay, this pervasive engagement with constructed realities must have significant ethical weight.
Immense. It raises profound ethical questions.
Like the ethics of belief itself.
Yes. You have W.K. Clifford arguing it's always wrong to believe anything without sufficient evidence, citing the potential harm of false beliefs. Evidentialism.
But William James had a different take.
James, in The Will to Believe, argued that in certain situations, live forced, momentous options where evidence is inconclusive, it can be permissible, even necessary, to believe without proof, especially if the belief can help create the fact.
Like believing you can succeed might help you succeed.
Exactly. This highlights a core tension in the ethics of HDHS. Evidential basis versus psychological or social utility. Clifford emphasizes the duty to critically examine evidence.
What about freedom and autonomy within these socially constructed worlds?
We value intellectual freedom, but we're all born into pre-existing simulations, cultural norms, societal expectations. True autonomy might lie in developing critical awareness.
Recognizing the constructed nature, questioning it, participating in reshaping it.
Precisely. Fostering that critical awareness within the necessary shared frameworks is a huge ethical challenge.
And the problem of cruelty, how does HDHS relate to that?
Cruelty often arises from empathy deficits and dehumanization. This involves creating a distorted simulation of others, stripping them of human qualities, which then seems to justify violence or mistreatment.
So people committing cruel acts are dealing with human simulation, but in a pathological way.
Yes, their simulation of the other is dangerously flawed. Narratives, ideologies, belief systems, early experiences can all contribute to these harmful simulations. Addressing cruelty requires challenging and reconstructing them.
What about imposing simulations, laws, norms, beliefs?
Yeah.
Society has to do that to function.
Yeah. Some level of imposition seems necessary for order. The dilemma is which simulations are imposed, how, by whom, and with what consequences for fairness and autonomy. Justifications often cite social order or the common good.
But history shows imposed simulations often serve dominant interests.
Absolutely. Which demands continuous critical scrutiny of the power dynamics and values embedded in our shared constructs.
And moral responsibility, if our actions are based on flawed internal simulations.
Ethical frameworks differ. Utilitarianism looks at consequences, deontology at duties, virtue ethics at character. A key factor is often the degree to which the flaws should have been recognized and corrected. Negligence versus genuine, non-culpable error.
And these socially constructed realities can systematically disadvantage groups, right?
Right.
It's based on race, gender, etc.
Yes, creating major issues of justice and equality. Even scientists can unwittingly perpetuate biases embedded in shared HDHS. It underscores the ethical imperative to critically examine the foundations and consequences of our shared simulations, especially those creating inequalities.
So there's this fundamental ethical tension.
Between individual epistemic responsibility, trying to get our personal simulations right based on evidence, and the societal necessity of shared, often less critically examined simulations for cohesion and function.
Truth versus functional community. Liberty versus order.
That's the core tension. Finding the right balance between critical inquiry and pragmatic acceptance is key.
Okay, so why do we do all this? What is the fundamental human need for HDHS? What purpose does it serve?
It seems deeply tied to our existential needs. We grapple with the awareness of mortality, the lack of inherent cosmic meaning. Existentialist philosophy says we must create our own meaning.
And HDHS is how we do that.
Largely, yes. Through personal narratives, we create unity and purpose in our own lives. Through shared belief systems, cultural, religious, we find answers to ultimate questions, a sense of place, a framework for meaning.
So we need HDHS because we're meaning-seeking beings aware of our finiteness.
It seems that way. It helps us cope with that existential vacuum.
And who benefits? Obviously, individuals gain identity, purpose, belonging. Groups get cooperation, order, cultural transmission.
But it's not always equitable. Dominant simulations often reinforce existing power structures. Think Bourdieu on cultural capital, Harari on imagined orders creating hierarchies, Chomsky on media manufacturing consent. Certain groups benefit more.
And the pursuit of wealth and health, common goals, that's about navigating these dominant societal simulations successfully.
Often, yes. Achieving what the dominant simulation defines as success.
What about the Bostrom idea again? If life is a simulation, what does that do to purpose?
It's speculative, but purpose could be externally defined by the simulators, or something we still construct internally, or maybe found in understanding the nature of the simulation itself and what happens after death. More simulation, who knows?
And the question about teaching children about HDHS, you mentioned we already immerse them.
Right. Socialization is teaching them the prevailing simulations. The implicit question is usually about teaching them critically about these constructs.
How do you balance needing them to internalize norms with fostering critical thinking?
It's a pedagogical challenge. Likely a gradual introduction of concepts like perspective taking, source evaluation, critical analysis as they mature cognitively.
So the need for HDHS stems from this tension between self-awareness and the drive for purpose-driven cooperation.
I think so. HDHS bridges the gap, allowing us to construct meaning and purpose, motivating action, fostering social bonds. It's a sophisticated cognitive and cultural adaptation for flourishing in uncertainty.
Okay, finally, let's bring AI back into the picture. How might AI act as a guide, or even an architect in understanding and potentially enhancing HDHS?
AI offers a unique perspective, partly because it creates its own models and simulations. AI user simulation, LLMs generating believable language, modeling what some call momentary selves.
So studying AI simulations can teach us about human ones.
Potentially, yes. AI research, by grappling with challenges and making its simulations accurate and believable, might illuminate the underlying algorithms, heuristics, and vulnerabilities of human reality construction. It could offer a kind of computational understanding of HDHS.
And could AI help mitigate some of the negative aspects of flawed HDHS, like biases?
There's potential there. Bias detection algorithms imagine an AI logic lens could help identify cognitive biases or logical fallacies in human reasoning or writing.
Or in mental health.
AI analysis of language or behavior data might spot patterns related to delusions or conditions involving distorted realities. AI could even generate personalized stimuli narratives, virtual experiences designed to help modify maladaptive schemas or beliefs. Think AI chatbots for psychological support.
What about fostering beneficial simulations?
AI-driven coaching or therapeutic tools could help individuals construct more resilient, positive personal narratives for better well-being. AI-powered educational simulations could offer immersive learning for practicing critical thinking or empathy.
Simulating different cultural perspectives.
Exactly, to foster cross-cultural understanding.
But this sounds like it comes with huge ethical considerations.
Massive. The potential benefits are balanced by significant risks.
Like autonomy and manipulation.
Yes. The risk of AI subtly manipulating thoughts and behaviors by embedding values in algorithms without user awareness or consent is real.
Bias and fairness.
If AI is trained on biased data, it could perpetuate or even amplify those biases in the simulations it helps create or the advice it gives.
Transparency. The black box problem.
That makes it hard to critically evaluate AI's suggestions or hold it accountable if it recommends flawed beliefs or actions.
And the alignment problem. Ensuring AI goals align with human values.
Especially when influencing something as fundamental as perception and belief that's incredibly complex.
And who decides what counts as a better or more accurate simulation for AI to promote?
Exactly. That involves normative judgments about truth, well-being, the good life. There could be conflicts between accuracy, personal satisfaction, and social functionality. It raises deep philosophical questions.
So while AI offers potential benefits for navigating HDHS, extreme caution is needed.
Absolutely. Intervening in subjective realities, even therapeutically, requires robust ethical frameworks, human oversight, transparency, and a commitment to user autonomy. These are active areas of philosophical exploration right now.
Okay, so to bring it all together, this deep dive into dealing with human simulation shows it's just fundamental, pervasive to human existence.
Yeah, from the earliest symbolic thought in caves to modern social norms, personal stories, everything.
And this capacity is rooted deep in our cognition, our evolution, our neurobiology. It enables meaning-making, social cooperation.
But it's not without its dangers. The ethical complexities, the potential pitfalls, delusion, bias, manipulation, injustice, they're always there.
Highlighting the power dynamics inherent in defining reality, both individually and societally, the Thomas theorem looms large.
And that responsibility for the evidential basis of our beliefs, like Clifford argued, and the justice of our societal simulations.
And AI plays this dual role, a tool for understanding HDHS, maybe even shaping it.
Offering potential benefits in bias detection, well-being, but posing serious ethical challenges around autonomy, fairness, manipulation.
Requires ethical foresight, strong safeguards.
Definitely.
And connecting back to that initial idea of pursuing a quality life, that's intimately linked to the nature of the simulations we inhabit, isn't it?
Has to be.
So our agency, our power, lies not in escaping simulation that seems impossible, but in consciously, ethically, shaping our personal and collective simulations.
Shaping them towards truth, justice, compassion, human flourishing.
It's like this continuous journey through the labyrinth of lived experience, always constructing and reconstructing, hopefully towards better simulations.
Ones that serve our deepest human aspirations for meaning and connection.
So a final thought for you listening. Consider the simulations you engage with daily. Your personal beliefs, societal norms, the narratives from media. How critically do you examine them? And maybe more importantly, what role do you play, consciously or unconsciously, in shaping them towards a more truthful, more just reality?
This is DigitView.